So in today's exploration, I wanted to look at taking a Cold Fusion form and transcluding it into another page using Hotwire. So first, let's look at the non-progressively enhanced application. This is just the vanilla Cold Fusion application. I have a list of notes here. If I go to the Add Note page, you'll see that I'm taken to a completely new page. There's some validation here. I have to provide a note. Hello world. If we submit that, what is happening is the note is added to a persistent store on the back end, and then we're redirected back to the main page where the new list of notes is rendered. And if we look in the network activity, we can see all this. Let's go to add note. We're taken to the create, test, and you can see we're posting back to the create page, and then we get a 302 redirect, and you can see that the location sends us back to index, and then index re-renders the list of notes, including the note that we just created. So what we want to do with Hotwire now is progressively enhance this so that our add note form is actually inlined at the top of our list of notes so that we don't actually have to leave the page to add a note. And when we do that, we want the list of notes to be updated and the form to be reset. So let's go ahead and progressively enhance. So I'll put the Hotwire script into our page and let's refresh. And you'll notice immediately that our add note link is being replaced with the form from the other page. And now we can see transcluded form for the win. And immediately that note is being added, and you can see that the new note is being rendered in the list here. And we're doing this without any redirects. So if we look here, and let's just look at, let's try it again. Let's say test. So we are posting back to the create, but this time the create page is not responding with a 302 redirect. Instead, it's responding with a 200 OK response. And you'll see that my response is actually of a type turbo stream. Now, oftentimes in the Hotwire community, it seems that people will use this turbo stream as an opportunity to apply DOM or document object model manipulations, meaning adding a new item to the list, clearing this input field or something to that effect. I'm going to use a different approach. Instead, I'm going to use a custom stream element, custom turbo stream element, and I'm going to perform visits. So you'll see that instead of having DOM manipulations, I have this action equals visit. And we'll come back to that in a second. So first, let's just take a look at how the form is being transcluded. If we jump into our main page, here's our notes header. And what you'll see is a turbo frame with an ID create frame. Now the default rendered static content is that button that we saw in the first go round, this add note, which would normally bring us to the create page. Now when Hotwire kicks in and progressively enhances this page, it's going to replace this static content with the content of this remote URL, which is that create page. The create page therefore has to also include a turbo frame with this ID. Otherwise, we'll get an error that there's no matching turbo frame and it will be elevated to a full page rendering. Now, this is not the only turbo frame on this page. We also have a turbo frame here wrapping our list of notes, and that will become important when we want to refresh the notes after a new note has been created, but we'll come back to that in a second. Let's take a look now at our create page, which again has to have the same turbo frame. And if we look at create, we'll come back to the logic of the processing momentarily, but you'll see here's my add note. Here's the turbo frame. It has the same ID. It's not being statically included, it's being dynamically included, and we'll come back to that in a moment. And you'll see by default it targets the top. And that way, even when the Hotwire application accesses this directly, so for example, if I come back here and I go directly to create, so we're accessing the same progressively enhanced app, but without it being transcluded, and I can say not transcluded. And if we look at the network activity for a moment, we say add note, you'll see that this time when I post back to the page, we are getting that 302 found redirect, and we're redirecting back to the index page. So we need a way to be able to both redirect when it's being accessed directly and to not redirect when it's being transcluded. Okay, so let's go back into the code for a second. One thing to understand when a request is being posted by TurboDrive inside of a frame, TurboDrive does a couple of things. Let's take again another look here at what's going on. If we look at the request headers, what we can see are two things. One, the turbo frame, the contextual turbo frame ID is being included as the turbo frame HTTP request header. The other thing that we want to see is that in the accept header, the turbo stream type is being included, meaning that the client, or TurboDrive in this case, is willing to accept responses of type turbo stream. Now, I'm going to capture both the accept state and the turbo frame state in my onRequest handler in my ColdFusion Application CFC framework. So if we look in our Application CFC and we look in the onRequest start event handler, and this gets called at the top of every single incoming ColdFusion request, what you can see is that I'm getting the HTTP request headers, and then I'm capturing the turbo frame state, whether it's a frame and what that frame ID is, as well as whether or not the accept header includes that turbo stream type. So now every part of my request can access this request.turbo structure and determine whether or not it's coming from a frame or a stream, which brings us back to our create page. Our create page is going to post back to itself, which is what most form submissions do in a ColdFusion application. And you'll see in the top here in my processing, after I add the note, I check to see whether I'm in a frame. If I'm in a frame that allows for streams, I'm going to respond with a turbo stream. Otherwise, I'm going to do that traditional redirect that we do in our ColdFusion applications. And the create stream is where we get to render those visit custom actions. Let's quickly jump into our main.js file, and you'll see that I'm defining a custom visit on the stream actions. And what this does, and this is from a previous post, it essentially allows me to call the turbo visit using data attributes on that visit element. So, sorry, jumping back again to our create page. If we're in that frame and we can respond with a stream, we're going to render a stream instead of the traditional location. And if we look at the stream, what you'll see is that it issues two different turbo stream elements. One is a visit on the create frame. So what that's essentially going to do is refresh the turbo frame wrapper around our add note form. But then the other visit is for our notes list. So we're issuing two different frame-based redirects. And if we jump back to our index page, we have our ID here for create frame, and then we have our ID here for notes list. And these are the two redirects or visits that we're issuing from our add note form. So essentially what it's going to tell the TurboDrive system to do is reload this frame and reload this frame. So it's reloading this is going to implicitly reset the form, and then reloading this is going to implicitly include the new note that we just created. So let's just watch this one more time. All right, so let's clear our network there, and let us clear all the notes. Let's clear this. So we say test. So let's take a look at what happened. So we posted to our create page. It responds with 200 OK. And now if we look at the preview, we can see that we have two turbo stream elements, one for the create frame visiting create, and we can see that we have the follow-up create HTML request, and then one for our notes list, which you can see is for the index page. Now the index page, which contains everything in it, also, if we look at the response, also includes, of course, the turbo frame around our notes list. And what TurboDrive is doing is actually it's just plucking out this content and using it to refresh this turbo frame. So we don't get a full page refresh, but we do pluck out parts of the underlying full page request. So I think this is actually going to unlock a lot of user experience potential inside of our ColdFusion applications, because a lot of what we do is create forms that update lists. And if we can inline some of those forms, then being able to refresh the lists and the forms using a custom TurboStream action seems like a pretty powerful step forward. Now, there are probably other ways to do this, but I do like the idea that using a custom visit here feels very much more in alignment with how we would handle a traditional form post in our ColdFusion applications. So while it might be a little bit more brute force and obviously requires additional network activity based on the outcome of the form submission, I think it's an easier mental model when it comes to baby stepping your traditional ColdFusion request response lifecycle towards a Hotwire turbo drive progressively enhanced application.